Welcome to another episode of the Investors Corner podcast, and this week me and my co-host Ian were thrilled to have Jamie Shepherd, Managing Director of Soteria Planning, with us. Now in this episode we tackle the complexities of probate. Why does it take so long, and how can we potentially avoid or speed up the process? Jamie also shares invaluable insights on estate planning, covering what you need to consider to ensure your loved ones are taken care of when you're no longer here. And we even dive into how assets like cryptocurrency and stocks and shares are handled within an estate. Now, planning for the future when we're not here isn't a topic most of us like to think about, but it is so essential. Without proper planning, everything that you've worked hard for could be at risk. Jamie's insights are packed with golden advice, making this episode a must listen. So sit back, relax, get ready to learn how to protect your family's future, and don't forget to subscribe to the Investors Corner. Enjoy the episode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Investors Corner podcast. If you're listening, not watching, I'm pointing at the pillow, reading it. These new snazzy pillows that we've got. This week's guest, me and Andy, off the cuff, are going to quiz Jamie Shepherd, who is the Managing Director of Soteria Planning, all around estate planning. I've got a couple of live questions that have come in through LinkedIn, WhatsApp and the socials for Jamie as well. He doesn't know these questions.
Oh, on the spot.
On the spot questions. And me and Andy are going to quiz him for some personal advice as well on our own situation. So it's going to be live, authentic. If we catch him out, please comment the funny face emoji within the social media clips that we're going to put out. Have I made you nervous now, Jamie?
No.
No, he's ready to go.
He's confident. He's
Absolutely
ready to go.
pooping it. Season pro. Well, look, the first question that I've got from someone, Andre, avid fan of the show, he knew you were coming on, and he simply said, why does the probate process take so long, and is there a way of avoiding that? So I'm going to throw that one at you first.
Oh, blimey. So I think the process takes so long because the probate registry is a government department. So typically government departments are usually overworked, understaffed. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact it's a paper exercise. A lot of it comes down to the fact that there's only so many people that can sign things off. It's obviously a process that the lay person can do themselves, or they can instruct a professional to do the work for them. The lay person is potentially more likely to do something wrong, which then of course can cause delays. The professional, you would like to think, is going to get things correct first time, but it really is a point of, well, how long is a piece of string? Because recently I've seen probates done really quick, and I've seen probates take really long. In terms of avoiding it, so I think probate is something that is not needed when every single person dies, but from an investor's perspective, if you've got a property and it's in your name, you're the sole owner when you pass away, probate is going to be needed to transfer that property into the names of your beneficiaries. Now, is there a way in which you can avoid that process? Yes, if the property was owned by a vehicle such as a trust, then potentially you would avoid that probate process. And there are lots of companies out there that kind of use trusts as a selling point to avoid probate. But is that needed? Do you want to avoid probate?
For people that don't understand what you mean, they're using a trust as a vehicle.
Yeah.
Could you just expand on that for people that are not sure what that actually means?
Of course. So a trust is a legal entity in its own right that can own an asset. Now, a trust usually has three main roles, and the three main roles are a settlor, a trustee, and a beneficiary. Now, the settlor is the person or persons that are creating the trust, putting into the trust. So if a landlord owns a property and they're putting the property into a trust, they are the settlor. Then you've got the trustees, and the trustees are the managers, the people that run the trust day to day. They're responsible for things like tax returns. They're responsible for making sure the trust is maintained how it needs to be maintained. And then, of course, the beneficiaries, hopefully, are the people that should benefit. But I think, like all good aspects, a question to all clients should be like, well, okay, on your death, Mr. Mrs. Client, okay, let's avoid probate by putting the property in trust. But what then happens? Like, your family going to sell the property? Do they want to keep the property? Or if they're going to sell it, okay, well, why not just go through probate? Yes, it might take 6, 9, 12 months, okay, as part of your estate to sort out, but then sell the property. 9 times out of 10, people aren't in a hurry to sell the property when somebody dies. There's emotion that's got to happen first. Grief has got to happen first. So I'm not a massive fan of necessarily saying put a property in a trust to avoid probate. I think probate just needs to be explained simpler to clients. I mean, I know we're on a show talking about property, but let's talk about money. So from a money perspective, banks, financial institutions will have their own rules, regulations that people need to abide by for probate. For example, if you've got a married couple that have got £3,000 each in their own personal name and they've got a joint bank account that holds their joint savings, in the event of first death, they're not likely to need probate. However, of course, sometimes I see people that maybe they have joint savings, but it's in one person's name because that one person tends to do the finances. So rather than putting a savings account in a joint name, because sometimes the joint account might not have the best interest rate, they'll put the money in a sole account in that person's name. Now, if that person was to die first and the money that's in that account is over a certain value, sometimes rule of thumb can be over 50,000, but like I said, it's bespoke to whoever's holding the money. Then probate would be needed, even if there's a will, okay, to get that money from person A to person B. So it doesn't matter if people are married or whether they've got a will in place. Probate would still be needed to transfer money, so depending on the scenario.
In my personal situation, then I'm married. I've got 2 kids. I've got 2 joint accounts with my wife, one where we put our dividends into to effectively pay the bills, and then there's another one which is our self-assessment kind of tax fund, if you like. So they're the 2 joint ones, but to the side of that, my wife's got her own ISA and I've got a high interest savings account. So let's just say, for example, I've got 65 grand in my high interest savings account. That's in my name. So if I was to pass away tomorrow, there's nothing disclosed in my will or anything of that nature on that basis. So would that bank account go into probate effectively for my wife or children, depending on how the will is written, to then inherit that money?
Yeah, it probably would.
And would you pay tax? Would they pay tax on that as well?
So obviously I know what would happen in your scenario, but let's just suppose you've written a will that says in the event of your death, everything of yours transfers to your wife. In that scenario, your wife would benefit from something called spousal exemption, meaning there would be no tax. Okay, so anything you leave to your wife is exempt from inheritance tax. So the ISA, the high interest savings account of 65,000, it could be 6.5 million. It would still transfer to your wife free of tax. Now, interestingly, if you gave it to anybody else apart from your wife, there could be a tax. Okay, but it depends on the value.
Does that only apply if you're married? Sorry.
The spousal exemption.
Yeah, if we were not married, would that still...
Marriage or civil partnership.
Okay.
So if you were common law, living together, been together 20 years, not married, then yeah, the inheritance tax could be payable. It wouldn't be payable on a figure of £65,000, but of course in that scenario you're taking the whole estate into account. You're taking potentially half the property. You're taking into account the value of personal possessions, your vehicles, your watches, etc. So yeah,
that's a good way of mitigating the taxes.
And quite a common question I might get asked in that scenario, Ian, is actually, well, how do I stop that £65,000 going to probate? And I would come back to you and say, well, let's just suppose Ian passes away, £65,000 is now frozen for 6, 9, 12 months, worst case. Is wife okay financially in that time period? And then we're looking at things and saying, well, she's got her own ISA. She will have access to the joint accounts, most probably. She might get insurance payouts, pension payouts. If she's okay without that £65,000 for 6, 12 months, it's fine.
Okay, makes sense. Let's use Andy as a case study here. So if you were going to advise Andy on getting a will set up, and Andy's got his residential house, it's mortgaged, he's got 3 buy-to-lets in a portfolio, they've all got 50% worth of mortgage on them, 50% worth of cash. And what Andy's worried about is he wants that hard-earned work that him and his wife have gone towards getting to ensure that his daughter receives it if he was to pass away after his wife then passes away. He wants everything to go to her. Is there a way within the will that you can effectively create that layering system for someone like Andy in that situation? Because that's more or less your personal life if we put that as a case study.
Yeah, I think so. That's exactly what it is. And what Ian just said is that I'd want everything to go to Georgina. But one thing that I think about is that if I passed away, and obviously Georgina was my wife, but then she moved on to find someone new or something like that, would that affect the money that Poppy might get further on in life? Are there what's the layers to it all, like Ian just said?
Yeah, so obviously from an asset perspective, first of all, I would want to understand the buy-to-let portfolio. Is that personal name? Is that limited company? But let's just answer the question here. So essentially, logistically, if you write a will that says everything goes to my spouse, and then on my spouse's death, everything goes to my daughter, then yes, on your death, everything's clean, everything's easy, everything will pass to spouse. But spouse, if we take today, you pass away tomorrow, spouse could live another 50 years. In that 50 years, there's 3 main issues that could potentially stop your daughter from inheriting. Those 3 main issues is that spouse could get remarried.
Yeah.
Spouse could potentially go into a care home and need all that money to pay for her care home. Spouse could go bankrupt. They're the 3 main issues. Now, when talking to people, let's be realistic. You would never have a concern that in this scenario, something happened to you, everything went to Georgina. She's going to do something to deliberately disinherit Poppy. If she did that, if she went and changed her will and cut Poppy out, Poppy probably deserves it. So there's probably not.
What did she do?
There's probably not a concern there around that. But of course, one of the main issues, certainly for people our age, is the whole remarriage piece.
Yeah.
And the remarriage piece is massive because people do move on. People do have second marriages, third marriages. People do, and people never have that intent of stopping their child or children from inheriting. Most of the time it happens by accident. And so when preparing your wills, you'll have 2 options. One of your options will be to prepare standard wills, if you like. Some people might call them simple wills. In the event you die, it goes to spouse, vice versa. In the event you both die, it goes to daughter. Now, the risk there is that daughter might not inherit. We've already disclosed that. Now, a better option could be, and this is not for everyone, but to look at a more comprehensive will, where essentially you can say, okay, well, look at all my assets, and I've got a main residence, I've got some buy-to-let properties. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my share of those properties, or maybe just my share of the main residence, into a trust. Okay. Now, remember, we've already discussed what a trust is. It's a legal entity that can hold an asset. Now, in the event of my death, my share of this property or properties will be held by this trust. The rules of the trust are going to state something along the lines of, for the rest of her life, Georgina can use the property. So whether that be stay living in the main residence rent-free, whether that mean retaining or getting a rental income from the buy-to-let properties. Now, at the same time, she will never own your share of the asset. And because she'll never own it, she will never lose it. Okay. Now, Poppy would inherit your share of the trust, but only when Georgina dies. Now, of course, we could look at, well, Poppy gets it if Georgina gets remarried again. But actually, my advice to you in that scenario is, if something happened to you tomorrow, you'd probably want Georgina to meet somebody else and bring Poppy up, but you wouldn't want that person to have anything of yours. So the trust allows you to protect Georgina, but also make sure Poppy would always get what's yours. Now, if you look at that sort of planning, that's going to protect the scenario of if you pass away first. It's not going to protect anything in Georgina's name because that's already in Georgina's name. Georgina's living. If she got married again, that asset or her share of the asset is obviously at risk. Now, when it comes to trust planning, tax planning, absolutely any of these things, it's always protect the worst case scenario. It's never this is going to happen. It's never this is going to happen, but things do happen.
Yeah.
The worst case scenario is out there. It has happened. So do you want to protect against it? It's down to you.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked about savings and buy-to-let investments and main residence and stuff. We did a podcast on, was it top 10 investments or top 6 investments?
Yeah.
And one of the top investments on there was cryptocurrency. So how would cryptocurrency work within, planning financially and leaving things to people that you want to leave it to? Is that treated the same as a sort of savings or an account like that, or is it excluded from what you can do within a will?
Great question. So most definitely it's included. It's definitely part of the estate. Now, worst case scenario when it comes to cryptocurrency, as you may know, if you hold crypto and you pass away and your family or your executors don't know the key, don't know how to access that crypto, it's gone.
Yeah.
But the value of that crypto is part of your estate. So you could be in a scenario where you pay inheritance tax on the value of your crypto,
right,
but your family don't actually receive your crypto. From an estate planning perspective, crypto is obviously very new, and I'm sure there are lots and lots of further developments to come with regards to best ways to hold it, best ways to transfer it through the generations. But for now, certainly one of the things I tell clients is just be aware, if you pass away tomorrow, how do your family executors know how to access that and deal with that transition? Because some people hold millions on that stick.
Over the next 10 years, there's going to be so much money lost because people can't access the wallets.
I've actually had somebody recently on LinkedIn contact me saying, would I be interested in receiving payment via crypto? And I just thought, what? Like, no. You can pay by card, not crypto.
Yeah.
But people are buying properties now, especially across Europe, in Dubai and places like that. Property is being purchased via crypto. We've spoke about it on this. We're not the most complex of people that understand crypto. We'd love to get someone on the podcast to come in and really deep dive into it. But one thing we know is it's not going away, and it's going to be part of definitely our futures, of our generation. And over the next 10 years, it's going to become more and more of a dominant way that people are going to trade, purchase, use.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how it unfolds.
It's going to happen, is it? We're going to be talking about using digital currency at some point instead of cash. I think that they're already talking about it. There's a lot of people against it. There's a lot of people for it. So, but at some point, with all of the technology that's happening now and all of the AI coming forward, it's going to be a technology world and a digital world.
You've only got to look at the local news, the local Facebook groups, where so many banks, certainly here in Berkshire, are closing down, aren't they? So the older generation that like to go into the bank once a week to take money out.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but I can't remember the last time I went to a cash point or I walked into a bank.
I get frustrated if I have to take my card out these days. And pay everything.
Yeah,
it's a pain in the back.
But that's what I mean.
I don't know the pins anymore because I'm not using them. You used to use them daily, didn't you? Pop up to the hole in the wall, check out your balance.
Yeah.
Before online banking, none of that anymore. The world is evolving. It is changing. On the stocks and shares assets that people are building, is that any different to what we spoke about with property and savings accounts? If you've got a portfolio of the stocks and shares, is it very much the same? Let's say we've got 100 grand's worth of shares today. It's worth whatever when we pass away. Is that exactly the same sort of concept for people?
In terms of probate, in terms of the transition?
Yeah.
So it's part of the estate. There are obviously some investments that can be outside of your estate, depending on if that's maybe an inheritance tax planning investment. But for you and I, if we're investing in stocks and shares, it's part of our estate. What you'll probably find with stocks, shares, some ISAs, certainly things like premium bonds, NS&I, most of the time probate will be required to get those assets.
And then just one last question from me, Jamie. if a lot of the investors we're talking to at the moment seem to be thinking they've got 2 kids and they might be a business owner, or they might have remortgaged their house, or they've got some assets. And a lot of investors we spoke to over the last couple of years have kind of got this idea around having their residence and buying 2 buy-to-lets that are going to become properties for their children. So they're almost looking at it and going, right, I've got a 5-year-old, I've got an 8-year-old, or whatever the age bracket is. And in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, I'd like to have the opportunity that their kids could potentially live in the property, either as an owner or as a tenant, rent-free, for example, whatever the personal scenario is. But it's becoming quite a motivator and a driving force for a lot of people to have 2 buy-to-lets, or 3 if they've got 3 kids, or 1 if they've got 1 kid. If you've just got, say you've got just a simple will, I think you called it, or no will in place, would the children inherit it, or would it just naturally go and have to be sold because actually it's not been allocated in a will to said name, you know, your boy, your girl? Would it just be that they'd have to be sold in that context and then they'd inherit the money? Or could the children actually have a conversation after death, let's say both parents have died, and go, well, I'll have that one, you have that one? Or is it not? Does it not work that way?
Yeah, great. I think ultimately it comes down to the executors of the will. Okay, so the executors of the will, first of all, would have to identify the estate, have a little look at what the value is in there, have a little look at any liabilities that might need paying, whether that be funeral costs, inheritance tax, legal fees. They would need to be settled first. If there are no specific items or cash legacies that are to be paid out, then obviously the estate is being distributed. If the estate is being, let's just make this up, being shared between my 3 children, and let's just say the 3 children are the executors, okay, not too uncommon, then in that scenario the children can decide. But of course, before that process, you've got the inheritance tax that might need to be paid, and sometimes property may have to be used as a leverage to settle that inheritance tax. With any landlord that kind of wants their property to pass down to their children, they need to make sure they're doing things such as insuring against the mortgage, making sure any inheritance tax liability is covered, so that that property can safely go down to the children. Because otherwise, any expected tax bills could force a property to be sold, couldn't it?
It's quite common, isn't it? It's probably something that, you know, a fair bunch of the landlords and the investors that you talk to, it's a question that's worth asking in that long-term planning, really. And if people are listening to this now and they're thinking, right, that's either my future plan or it's my present, it's as I stand at the moment, then I would say everything that Jamie said here, we're talking in general fashion, but everyone's individual circumstances are all totally different normally. So best places to get in contact with you, Jamie, what would you say? Jump on the website or message you on LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, so we've got a website, we've got socials, we've got LinkedIn, Soteria Planning, or obviously I've got my own personal page, so I can be contacted there.
Yeah, it's been some great advice there, some great questions as well that people need to be thinking about. I think it's such an important part of it because we're so obsessed in the sort of hamster wheel of trying to create these assets and make a really good life for us and thinking about our retirement, etc., and do right by our children and, you know, our family and friends. But sometimes we forget the afterlife part of it, that we've also got a responsibility with these to do right by people and be tax efficient. You know, we talk to an accountant on an annual basis to get the best tax case scenario for whether it's as a business owner or an individual. But don't forget, after we pass away, we've also got that responsibility to do right by the kids because we've worked our whole life for it.
Yeah, it's the last thing people think about, isn't it? No one likes thinking about death and what happens after you're not here. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about and look into sooner rather than later, because if something does happen to you tomorrow and you haven't got things set up, and you know, it could just cause complications further on down the line. Your children could lose out. Your partner could lose out. It's just crazy not to look into it, really.
I mean, I have nowhere written down my Hargreaves Lansdown log in. I've got nowhere for my crypto.
Just tell me that, Ian. Just tell me that.
Yeah, there's not much in there. In fact, it's funny, we were talking stocks and shares just off camera, weren't we? And, you know, the sort of risk and reward of building these assets. But EasyJet is the topic. EasyJet is the topic at the moment in the press. And if we look at what's happened to EasyJet just in the last 3.5 years in the stock market, it's effectively now worth about a third of what it was 3.5 years ago, and that's never going to happen in property, but that's scary. You know the you know how volatile things are.
Well, I had a tip a few weeks ago that apparently Starbucks is the investment to make, because apparently they're trying to attack the Chinese market. Do with that information what you want.
Well, there we go.
There you go. That's an exclusive there from Jamie. Get stuck into investing in Starbucks.
That's the mic drop for the podcast. Jamie, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you very much. Good questions. Loved using Andy as a case study. That's not his personal details, by the way, although there were some that were thrown in.
See me for his address.
We'll be back next Friday. Thanks everyone for listening and watching.